normally. Most people feel that having a disability, especially a severe one, is tragic. But a growing number of people with disabilities reject this view of their lives. They're beginning to recognize a shared sense of outrage. Outrage at a history of ostracism, a lifetime of facing obstacles, and especially outrage at the devaluation of their lives. For the first time in history, we can begin to speak of a disability movement. Tonight on Ideas, we hear from some of the most outspoken leaders of this new movement. These are powerful voices, sometimes disturbing voices, speaking about coming to terms with their disabilities and how they're learning a new way to live in a world that often sees them as somewhat less than fully human. The program is prepared and presented by writer and activist Dave Hingsburger.
It was rainy, and I was desperate for something to do. After looking in the newspaper, I found myself in an acting workshop. The other students were like me, around 50, a little bored, and embarrassed to be there. The instructor was young, but she was also dead serious about acting. We broke into pairs and began a variety of acting warm-ups. By mid-morning, we'd laughed a lot. After lunch, we were all asked to come up with scenes. It was suggested that we do an improv based on Robert Latimer. 2 or 3 small groups tackled a scene, and 201, they presented Latimer as a loving father. Those playing Tracy gimped up their bodies and gazed reverently up at dear old Dad. Tracy was a prop in a play about parenthood, the focus of the drama, but oddly uninvolved in it. I suggested that we play the person inside Tracy. The first actress couldn't get into the part. Another tried. Eventually someone did a weak monologue about pain. People simply couldn't be her. Tracy was an abstraction to them. She wasn't flesh and blood. She wasn't real. Everyone could imagine themselves into a tree, or a breeze, or even a stone. Yet they couldn't imagine themselves into Tracy's mind. Her body they could do, but her mind escaped them. What would she think? I asked one student. Tracy was retarded, she replied. Do they think? I confessed to working with people with disabilities. I told them we had it wrong. It isn't, I think, therefore I am. It really is. I am, therefore I think. One woman began to cry. She said that she couldn't imagine being trapped in Tracy's body. It was as if the idea that there was a person inside Tracy scared them deeply. People with disabilities are familiar with this fear. To one they have heard people say, I'd rather be dead than, and fill in the rest. In a wheelchair, need help going to the bathroom, not be able to feed myself. Yet the lived experience of people with disabilities is quite different than what people expect. For Dan Wilkins, there is only 1 week's distance between the statement, I'd rather be dead, and the reality of life in a wheelchair.
I was at a hospital visiting a friend of mine who had been in a motorcycle accident and had buggered up her heel. And I went in to visit, and while I was in visiting her, in came this gaggle of nurses. I don't know what you call a group of nurses, but gaggle seems to work. And they had this push cart with all of this highly technical and dangerous heel bandaging equipment on there, and they asked me to step out into the hallway while they worked on her foot. So I step out in the hallway, and there in the hallway is a wheelchair against the far wall. Now, I don't know about you, but what do you do when you see a wheelchair? You get in it, start rolling around. And so I did that, not knowing anything of wheelchair etiquette, that it might be somebody's wheelchair, and they're going to come out that door over there and fall flat on their face. But I'm rolling around on the carpeting in this chair, and my arms are starting to get sore, and I'm starting to think, wow, what a bear, you know. And then I come to a drinking fountain. And in 1980, there weren't a lot of drinking fountains that were accessible. So I had to get out of the chair to get a drink. I stood up, and that got me thinking that there are a lot of other things I wouldn't be able to do if I ever had to use a wheelchair. Now, at this time in my life, I was pretty much a risk taker. I spent a lot of time hang gliding and rappelling and whitewater rafting and a lot of these other fun, high-risk sports. I got thinking of all these things I wouldn't be able to do, including, having a home and maybe getting married and having children, and all these things I wouldn't be able to do given living in a wheelchair. Now this is based on not having friends with disabilities and not knowing anything about living in a wheelchair. So by the time I got back to point A, thinking of all these things I wouldn't be able to do, I remember saying to myself, as if it was only yesterday, that I'd rather be dead than be in a wheelchair. Now, a week later, and this is the ironic part of the story, back in the same hospital, just past that drinking fountain through the double doors, in ICU, lying there with crutch-filled tongues in my head and traction and a broken neck, and looking at life with disability, life in a wheelchair, I remember saying to myself, well, maybe I'll give it a shot, because I think that's what we do as human beings. We're resourceful and we're creative, and we give it a shot. And here I am now, almost 20 years after that decision, and I've come to do all of those things I thought I would never do again. I've gone whitewater rafting again. I've gone scuba diving. I've gone camping. I've gone backpacking. I've gotten married, and I have a beautiful little boy, my own business. So all of those misconceptions about living with a disability that I had prior to my accident, none of them were actually true.
Dan Wilkins is hugely sought after as a speaker on disability issues. He founded The Nth Degree, a company that produces an array of disability-themed T-shirts. One of the most popular reads, "If there is such a thing as us and them, it's not between black and white, old and young, disabled and not, male and female, gay and straight, Catholic, Protestant, Buddhist, etc., 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 blah, blah, blah. It's between those who get it and those who don't." His T-shirts speak to the disability experience and are often confrontational. One of the biggest sellers is a black tee with 3 words written in large font in blistering pink. Piss on pity. Dan is a husband, a father, a businessman. But when he first became disabled, he had no idea of what life would hold for him. When I met him, Dan had just given a keynote address in Indianapolis and brought the house down with his humor and his natural love of life.
When one acquires a disability, it doesn't just happen to him or her. It happens to everyone that cares about that individual. It happens to the moms and the dads and the brothers and the sisters and the wives and the children. So disability is something that when you start to heal, it's more than just the individual healing. It's a collective healing of all of these people that are involved. You lose friends, the ones that don't want to stick around to help you slide into a car to go to the restaurant or the bar or wherever you're going, but you have this core group of friends that remain, and then you immediately start to make new friends, friends that never knew you when you were much taller or whatever happens to be your disability. And then those old friends that really come together and remind you that who you were is who you are, and that you only get around a little differently now. So a serendipitous moment for me, as I think back, would have to be when in the acute care setting, probably 9 weeks into my disability, they were just starting to get me to set back up. I remember being on a tilt table, which a lot of people may not know what that is, but it's this medieval device used by a physical therapist and to help you get from the prone position you've been in for quite some time adjusted to being able to sit up for a given period of time. And so they put you on this and they tilt you up. Well, you tend to pass out a lot early on in the process. So one day on this tilt table, as I was sitting there laughing with my nurses, and I will tell you it's the nurses that make you well, because they're the ones you fall in love with first, the ones that really come in and have to do all of those things that you don't want people to have to do, but they do them and make you feel good. They're laughing and joking with me about this tilt table, and in walks my doctor, and he looks me in the eye and he says, "Dan, I don't think you understand how serious this is. You've broken your neck. You're going to be in a wheelchair for the rest of your life." And this is where in the movies you hear that life, life, life. Well, I didn't hear that, and I remember saying to him, well, I guess I'll save a lot of money on shoes. So I bust up, the nurses bust up, and the doctor, he just can't understand how I could be laughing at something so tragic. And he throws down the clipboard and storms out of the room saying I'm incorrigible. Well, that's when I learned that humor and healing go hand in hand. Another serendipitous moment, if I can go on about that was in rehab when one of my nurses got beyond the professional distance, and we went out for a night on the town as part of my therapy, and it ended up becoming a lot more than that. And I realized that, yes, even though I'd broken my neck, I still was a sexual being. So that was a real eye-opener for me, and it's just been all downhill since then.
We're not dead yet! We're not dead yet! We're not dead yet!
Rain pours down. It's a cold day to protest. Even so, John Kelly is at a rally to protest those who devalue the lives of people with disabilities. He feels nothing below the shoulders. He moves through life by breathing into a little tube attached to his wheelchair. A simple breath becomes right, left, forwards, or backwards. Wearing a huge red hat and a full growth of beard, he is the focus of many media cameras. With a broad grin, he says, "It's the hat. They love the hat." John Kelly believes that having a disability is seen as tragic because of what he calls ableist ideology.
Ableist ideology is the belief, which is completely unquestioned, that it's always better to have more ability. And it's just really not so. It's just neutral. Now, the fact that I can't use my arms and hands, to me, it really doesn't bother me anymore. I'm fine by using my mouth to type or using my shoulders to rub up against people. And ableist ideology says that if you have less ability, that means your quality of life suffers to the degree that you have less ability. And all studies show that people value their lives as long as they're not oppressed.
The very existence of the concept of ableist ideology demonstrates that people with disabilities have embraced their disability and the bodies they inhabit. They have managed to transcend societal messages that we all must live in perfect bodies with perfect hair.
I love my life, and I value human diversity, and disability is a natural part of being human. Human beings are incredibly flexible beings. That's why we can live in Arctic conditions and tropical conditions, underground, on top of the world. We can live without being able to use our arms and hands or our legs. We can do anything as long as we're welcomed and not oppressed.
The word ableism is used frequently within the disability community, but it's a word that has not yet become part of public discourse, the way the words racism, sexism, and homophobia have. Disabled writers and activists contend, however, that ableist attitudes permeate our society and are a threat to the disability community. The Reverend Jeffrey Wilder has had to deal with those who feel that his life isn't worth much. We meet to discuss the possibility of an interview in a restaurant of his choice in Lynchburg, Virginia. It's Sunday, and I arrive early to choose a table in a quiet section of the restaurant. I am surrounded by women with church hair and men wearing brightly colored suits. Jeff arrives with his friend Carolyn Bowling. She's an albino, and as a result of that mix of genes, she's also blind. He has cerebral palsy. When they enter the room, it freezes for the barest moment, and I think of Psalm 31. To every one of my oppressors, I am contemptible, loathsome to my neighbors, to my friends, a thing of fear. Those who see me on the street hurry past me. I am forgotten, as good as dead in their hearts, something discarded. Reverend Wilder and Carolyn Bowling join me. Once seated, her blindness isn't so evident, his disability less apparent. Noise returns to the restaurant, and we talk. Jeff agrees to be interviewed, and the next time we meet is in a church on the grounds of a state hospital where Jeff is employed as a chaplain. Jeff, though now he's fully employed in pastoral care, tells of the prejudice that he faced on his journey.
It's been an interesting road being someone with a disability and being a minister. In fact, when I was ready to be ordained, I asked my minister from my home church in Raleigh, North Carolina, if he would go with me and be a part of the ordination committee. And he had known me, for years. And he agreed to go. And of course, they asked me the exact same questions that they ask anybody else that is ordained and goes through that process. What amazed me was that after it was all over with and we were going back home, my minister said to me, "I just had no idea that you would respond as well as you did. I just didn't think that you would do well at all." And I couldn't help think that if I had had 2 straight legs and no disability, that the things that I said in that ordination council would not have surprised him at all. But because I have cerebral palsy and I look different, I think he expected me to respond differently in that kind of setting. And so actually it was a surprise to him that I became a fully ordained functioning minister. At the end of my year's internship, I still did not have a position to go to after this. Several of my fellow interns had gone to our associational minister, whose job it was to help find placement. All of my friends had reported being interviewed for at least an hour and having a very in-depth interview as to their interests and placements that might interest them. So I made an appointment, and on the day that I went, the secretary said, "Okay, you may go in now." I opened the door to his office to go in. He had risen from his seat, and at first when he saw my face, he was smiling and seemed very warm and friendly. But when I walked into his office and he saw the way that I walked across the floor, he completely shut down. The friendliness went out of his eyes. There was no warmth in his handshake. And my interview lasted 5 minutes, and I was basically told that he had no positions that fit my capabilities. If a doctor came up to me tomorrow and said, "Jeffrey, we're very excited. We have a pill that we can offer you, and this pill will make you normal," I wouldn't take it. So many people see me as a victim. And I've been asked by lots of people, "How long have you been a victim of cerebral palsy? How long have you been afflicted with cerebral palsy?" And it's not an affliction, and I've not been a victim. It is simply something that happened in my life through a series of brain hemorrhages shortly after birth. I think where normal people make a mistake is to assume that our disability defines who we are. I define who I am by my relationships with the people that I meet. My cerebral palsy does not define me. And I think that most people with disabilities would be quick to say their disability does not define them. They are much more than their disability.
Coming to terms with disability, education of oneself and others about what possibilities and limitations really exist is common in the disability experience. Jeff Wilder's joy with life is infectious. He speaks often of his wife, his children, his life as a minister. Like many who have disabilities, Jeff learned early on about the struggles and obstacles that he would have to overcome. He tells a story of a moment that changed him and his relationship to his family.
When I was about 8 years old, my family went to one of our favorite places to go. It was Hanging Rock State Park in North Carolina. We'd been a couple of years and just really loved it. As you can imagine, somebody with cerebral palsy would have trouble walking in those hills. I should have had an advantage since one leg is shorter than the other, but still, even then, it depends on which way you're facing as to whether it's an advantage or not. But this time was going to be really special because my uncle and my aunt who lived next door to us were going, and my 3 cousins were going too, so we were going to have a lot of fun. The one downer to that was that there is a mountain there, really neat mountain called Moore's Knob, and they were able to climb the mountain, and I was expressly forbidden not to because my parents felt like I'd probably fall, maybe get hurt. And so I watched my 2 brothers and my 3 cousins climb the mountain, and I would go as far as to this stream that cut right across the base of the mountain, and I could stay there and float boats and do things like that, and the stream was cool. But I remember looking across the stream and seeing the sign that pointed up to the slope of Moore's Knob, and it just said Moore's Knob this way, and watching them disappear up the trail and just wanting with every fiber of my being to be with them. It was just more than I could stand. So they went several times, and so one day I just had enough, and so I talked to my brothers and my cousins, and I told them, I said, I really want to go. Well, you know, you're not supposed to go because Mama and Dad said that you can't go. Oh, please, come on, they don't have to know. You know, we'll go up, we'll come down. Who will know? And so they really wanted me to go too, and I think that's the crux of the matter. And so they were easy to talk into this thing. And so up we went to Moores Knob, and the attraction for me going up this mountain was there's a ranger tower at the top. And they had come down and said, oh, it's so cool. You can see 7 states from up there. And I thought, how exciting that must be. You can see 7 states, and I really wanted to see that too. And so we went and climbed the mountain and climbed the ranger tower, and suddenly there, spread out below, is just this wonderful patchwork quilt of mountains and forests and a lake, and it was just beautiful, just absolutely beautiful. And then we realized we had to climb down. And the trick was we needed to climb down fast enough so that my mother and father wouldn't find out that we were gone. We got halfway down the mountain, and coming up to us from below was the voices of our parents calling our names. And we knew the jig was up, that they realized that my brothers and my cousins had absconded with me and had done the unpardonable thing, and they had taken me up the mountain. And so we got back down, and we're just standing there, and my parents are saying, Jeffrey, how could you? You could have fallen, you could have gotten hurt, you could have this, you could have that. And I looked at him, I was so excited, I just really didn't care. And I said, well, it was cool. I only fell 7 times going up and 7 times coming down, so it was just really cool. And I climbed the ranger tower, and I saw 7 states, and it was beautiful. And then I realized, well, it's time to be punished. And I just waited for my parents to tell me what heinous thing they were going to do to me. And instead, my father said, well, I'll tell you what, tomorrow you and I will climb. I think the reason my father decided that he would climb the mountain with me is because he just realized that there were going to be a lot of mountains down the road in my life, and that I may as well start learning how to climb now. And so I always have appreciated the fact that my father gave me the right to risk climbing that mountain. And that kind of allowance to risk went with me the rest of my life.
Dan Wilkins was the first person I ever heard speak about disability pride, about the existence of a community and a culture that's separate from the mainstream. As he talks about his place in the movement, his eyes tear up. I know he is speaking to me from the core of who he is now. The idea of disability pride seems unfathomable to most. Why would people be proud of an affliction? I've been asked. Dan, though, sees it quite differently.
Another important aspect of disability is the sense of pride that one feels because of that disability. I know that's hard for a lot of people that are non-disabled to understand, but for those of us with disabilities, we understand that we are part of something bigger. And that's something that comes somewhere along the way. You may have a mentor or a peer that comes in and enlightens you, or you may discover through your own searching that there's a larger community out there, a community of artists and musicians and poets and actors and writers and politicians and famous people, like Beethoven and Edison and Monet and Manet. We have a rich history of people with disabilities making a real contribution to humanity. And to be a part of that culture, to be a part of that is overwhelmingly encouraging and empowering. And I think about my disability. It's taken me to Iceland and Russia. I was there for the fall of the Soviet Union, and I was there because of my disability, making a difference in the lives of other people with disability there. And everywhere I go, I meet wonderful folks that are living proof that disability experience is not tragic and brave, but powerful and cathartic. It has opened my eyes to a much bigger picture of reality. It really is a soul gift in disguise.
Tonight on Ideas, you're listening to the second in a 2-part series called Life, Death, and Disability. It's prepared and presented by writer and activist Dave Hingsburger. Dave Hingsburger has worked in the disability field for almost 30 years.
Kyle Glozier is an exceptional child in many ways. He has Tracy Latimer's body and a razor-sharp intellect. He has experienced many of the physical pains and surgical treatments that Tracy experienced or would have experienced. He is a small child wrapped in a large wheelchair. In front of him is a big square box. On top of the box are small indented squares that represent sounds, words, and phrases. To speak, Kyle picks out the squares and pushes a play button. An odd mechanical voice speaks the words. He moves spasmodically and plucks keys with some difficulty, but he enjoys the conversation. On the day that I met Kyle, he had just done a keynote speech in front of over 1,000 people at an international conference on disability issues in Chicago. This kid clearly summed up what he saw as the battle for freedom from discrimination for all people with disabilities. I smile, and he asks me why. I tell him that the name of the voice box he uses is The Liberator. It seems to me, though, that the Liberator just might be this little kid sitting in this great big chair. Here is a piece of that speech. The little bleeps you hear are when Kyle tells the box to say the next sentence.
Disability pride is not having to feel sorry for yourself, it's liking yourself for who you are. Discrimination is when people don't allow people of a race, religion, sexual orientation, or disability go to all the places they want to go. When people with disabilities can't get on the bus, they get angry that they can't go everywhere they want to go, just like Rosa Parks. Society is changing slowly, but we need even more change to keep on pushing into the new millennium. We need to keep on pushing until all people are free from institutions and fully included into society. That reminds me of a song that my good friend Johnny Crescendo sings. Tear down the walls. One verse says, "Can't you see the justice coming at you now? It's coming down the road. It's coming down the street. It's coming for your kids. They're gonna hate you if you don't act now." If all people are exposed to people with disabilities at an early age, the disability makes no difference at all. They see just another person. They see past the disability. This is how we need to see society change. It is our turn now. Thank you.
The Gloziers are an incredibly close family. As we speak, Kyle's two brothers hang around the edges of the conversation. I wanted to know about the journey the family must have made, from grief to acceptance, and even pride, after they first learned about Kyle's disability.
When Kyle was first born, of course, we felt, what are we going to do? Mourned for the loss of a perfect baby. A lot of denial at first. I know when I first looked at him, I said, he doesn't look any different than our other son. Why are they saying that he's not going to be a normal child? As time went on, I could see that he wasn't developing like a normal child and knew that he had a disability, and it didn't really make any difference. What got me angry is the doctors said, he's not going to go anywhere. He's not going to develop. He's not going to do this. He won't be able to go to school. And I refused to accept that. Jim?
As Laura said, and I felt the same way, is that, looking at Kyle as a little newborn baby and comparing him to his older brother, Jason, there wasn't a lot of differences. And there was a whole lot of similarities more than that because they resembled each other. So in my mind, I compared him to Jason, and when Jason was born, of course, all non-disabled kids, they got this whole idea of grabbing the brass ring, getting, climbing to the top of the mountain, so to speak. And I looked at Kyle and I thought, well, why don't we try this? Why don't we shoot for the stars, and if we hit the moon, that's pretty damn good for me. And what really motivated me and what really angered me was not so much that my child was broken or damaged, because he wasn't. I didn't see him as being broken or damaged. What really angered me is they were introducing a double standard. And this double standard is the thing that really really pissed me off. It did. I mean, that's it. Is why is there a double standard? Why can we say to the child that's not disabled, you're going to be the president, and why do we say to the child that's disabled, accept what you have? And that whole idea, I think, translates into parents' perceptions of their children.
As parents of a kid with a significant disability, a child much like Tracy Latimer, the Glozers struggle to understand what Robert Latimer did and become quite emotional in talking about what happened and how they see it.
If they think a child is better off being dead, then it's murder. I know, following the Tracy Latimer case, that her mother said that she was a happy child. She smiled, she frowned, she cried when she was frustrated. She seemed like, like any other child underneath the disability. But Dad saw, she needs another hip surgery. She's in so much pain. She's in pain all the time. I don't know if they even ever asked Tracy if she was in pain or how much pain she was in. But I know that her mother said she was a happy child. Now what's going on? Dad was obviously tired of taking care of her, didn't want to take care of her anymore, and thought, well, did he really say she'll be better off dead or we'll be better off with her dead? That's the question.
I come at it from this whole idea of that, all of our children are the same. Number one, they're kids first. That's who they are. And if I, as a parent, murdered my oldest son, took him in a car and gassed him, I would be the biggest pariah on the face of the earth. I would be the hated, awful, Nazi-ish father. But if I kill my son with a disability, I may get out of it. I could play that. I could play the cards. I could play the burden. I could do all that. And that's the thing that angers me, because to me, both of those instances are murder. And I really do wonder how Tracy's father and mother got to that point. What put them there? Was it the system? And probably for some degree, yes, because I think what we do, the medical community in particular, give you this idea that you have a burden. And looking at my child's disability as our lifelong cross to bear scares the shit out of you. And that's what you need to stop. That's what our society needs to look at and needs to tell parents too, is that there are possibilities. There are things out there, and we need to build that structure. I know Canada has national health care. The United States doesn't have that. That, to me, is one of the biggest barriers to raising a kid with a disability. And Latimer's had access to national health care. But did they have access to members of the disability community as part of their child's daily life? For a person with a significant disability, they need to be introduced to that community. They need to know their place of belonging. And, I know a lot of disabled children aren't born to disabled families. Some are, but a majority of them aren't. But I think it's the role of that parent, and it's essential for that parent to seek out the disability community, to find those role models. Non-disabled kids got millions of role models. Disabled kid needs role models. We've got them. We've got Mike Auberger. We've got Justin Dart. We've got people. Steve Hawken. These are the role models, and this is what we need to emulate to disabled kids. That these are your heroes. These are your people. This is it.
People with disabilities are speaking more and more of community. Communities create an atmosphere where people care for each other. Astra Milberg is a woman with Down syndrome. She is part of the next generation, the generation that integrated neighborhoods and schools, the generation that had parents who both expected and experienced pride. Astra Milberg wanted to share some of her experiences growing up. There were things that she felt other kids with Down syndrome needed to know. These kids are not just her community, they're her responsibility. Here is Astra Milberg's advice to kids with Down syndrome, as first published in Mouth magazine, the voice of the disability nation.
Be proud of who you are. Having Down syndrome is kind of cool. I think we have beautiful eyes. Everyone tells me that we have the greatest smiles, and I think they are right. Being proud will help you in so many ways. It will ensure that you land softly every time someone treats you badly or calls you a name. You will hear them all. Retard, reject, dummy. I've heard them and really don't care what people who use those words think. They may think I am retarded, but I know they are prejudiced. Don't listen to people who say you can't do things. All sorts of people told me that I couldn't learn. Guess what? I went to college right along with typical students, and I passed the same courses that they did. Oh, I had to sit up real late at night and study. I knew it was harder for me to learn, but I did it. I can read, I can write, I can think, I can speak. There are more things that I can do than things I can't. Just remember, don't give up on yourself because someone says you can't do anything. Try it. You may surprise yourself. Discover. Life is fun and full of surprises. You know, I never kissed a guy until I was 20. But I discovered I liked it. Life is full of great things, like first kisses and chocolate. Every day, I sit down and enjoy strong coffee, real strong coffee, with milk and sugar. When I treat myself, I eat seedless grapes, cold and green. You too have lots to look forward to. I remember my first crush on an older man. I remember playing races with my parents. I remember swings and slides and skipping and jumping. I remember playing with a puppy and rubbing his belly. Enjoy it. Enjoy it all. Life is full of trials. But it's also full of excitement and fun and green grapes and chocolate.
Theater, art, poetry that is arising from the disability experience is further evidence that a community is forming. A community that defines the world through the experience of oppression more than the experience of physical limitations.
We're wet. We're not dead yet. We're here. We're wet. We're not dead yet. We're here.
At a rain-soaked public gathering in Boston, people in electric wheelchairs, covered in ponchos and rain gear, looked like boats sailing through the puddles. If they were boats, then Connie Panzerino was the Queen Mary. She glided by me on a huge contraption with tubes and wires and electronic stuff. She steered the thing by some mechanism attached to her throat. Deftly, she swung the chair around, then backed into a small space. She was the next speaker. Someone held a megaphone to her mouth, and someone else held the paper she read from. I wasn't able to record her voice. Her words are confrontational, and I'm warning you now that some people may find her language offensive. Here's Connie's poem. It's called No Decision Here.
I can kiss for hours without coming up for air. I can drink without stopping to breathe. In fact, my breath doesn't stop anymore. Hold your breath, ordered the CAT scan man. I can't, I said. You see, I have a trach with a ventilator. It's a hole in my neck, an ultimate body piercing. You can't smother me because I don't use my nose anymore. I get my air elsewhere, from everywhere, and nothing can stop my breath. Except when the hoses disconnect and the alarm goes off and my personal care assistant is in the bathroom and my heart is pounding as she runs to save me. Each second becomes an eternity as I wait to be reconnected to my lifeline of tubing. But I can kiss for hours without coming up for air. And I'm expensive. I am an astronaut on Earth. People say to me, it's not natural. When you can't breathe anymore, it means you should die. I say, fuck you and Kevorkian. There's no decision here when I can kiss for hours without coming up for air, make love, grow tomatoes, write books, speak out, and each day I survive, I become a living testimony to the power of life. Meantime, I'm gonna eat pussy without coming up for air.
We're wet. We're not dead yet. We're here.
I don't know what shocked the passers-by most. That there was a woman alive in that chair, that she was glad to be alive, that that woman had a sexuality, that that sexuality was different. In an instant, Connie became completely and utterly different from everyone watching. I felt like cheering.
We're not dead yet. We're here.
The rally in Boston was sponsored by an organization of people with disabilities that fight assisted suicide, called Not Dead Yet. Not Dead Yet was founded by Diane Coleman. The protest in Boston and similar protests around the United States have happened because of her passionate commitment to life and death issues for people with disabilities. A true revolutionary, she has lost count of the number of times she's been arrested. People in the movement speak of her with some awe. When I first meet her, I'm taken aback. She's a frail-looking woman, but she's much more than she appears. Her beginning in the disability rights movement came about because of death, not pride.
My name's Diane Coleman, and I have a lifelong neuromuscular disability and have used a wheelchair since the age of 11, motorized wheelchair. And I first became involved in the issue of assisted suicide and euthanasia in 1985. I was a lawyer in Los Angeles, and I was on the board of a Center for Independent Living, and I was contacted to go to a rally because Elizabeth Bouvier, a 26-year-old woman with cerebral palsy, had asked for help to commit suicide. And she had had some really serious problems in her life, a miscarriage, a marriage breakup, things that would drive anyone to despair. But the media and the ACLU lawyers and others were advocating for her to have help to commit suicide because of her disability, and everyone was saying that she was upset because of her disability, and we in the disability community understood that that was not the issue. She'd had that all her life, just as I had had my disability all my life. The issue was that she'd had some really serious setbacks with something as heavy as a miscarriage and marriage breakup. And so we went and protested, and that was my first involvement. Not long after the Elizabeth Bouvier case, and she did win a right to get help to commit suicide, but she changed her mind by then. Fortunately, the court case took a long time. Some other court cases happened involving people with disabilities who were either stuck in nursing homes against their will or were afraid of going into nursing homes because of the severity of their disability and the loss of their parents or other supports. And we kind of call these the give me liberty or give me death cases in Not Dead Yet, because they involve people who were either dealing with, I want to get out of this nursing home, I don't want to go into one, or I'd rather die. And society didn't care at all about helping them get out of nursing homes, but was ready to just jump up for their cause. Society was ready to come to their aid as soon as they wanted to die, and called them courageous and wonderful for that, and never had helped them to get out of a nursing home. So those cases resulted in a number of deaths of people with disabilities. More and more folks got interested, and the right to die was expanded. Finally, and this is getting up to the formation of Not Dead Yet, Kevorkian came on the scene in the early 90s. And he went on killing sprees, as many are aware, and killed many people with disabilities, non-terminal disabilities. That's the profile of 70% of his victims, people with non-terminal disabilities. A lot of folks don't know that because the press didn't report it very well. But in 1996, two big things happened that caused the formation of Not Dead Yet. One is that two circuit courts of appeal in the United States ruled that there is a constitutional right to assisted suicide. And in that same early part of the year, Kevorkian was acquitted specifically in the assisted suicides of two women with non-terminal disabilities. That really made it clear that all the efforts that had been made informally by the disability community for many years, amicus briefs, conference presentations, articles, were ineffective in shifting the debate. We really felt that it was not working, and I was at a policy summit of the National Council on Disability and went up to one of my friends in ADAPT who said he knew that I'd been thinking about founding a group to take the issue to the streets. And he said, I have a name for your group. and that name was Not Dead Yet. It related to the Monty Python and the Holy Grail movie where people were being thrown on dead body carts even when they weren't dead. And that was the founding of Not Dead Yet in April of 1996.
Diane Coleman's first arrest came partly because of Tracy Latimer. While it's true that Tracy's death has rallied the disability community, it's also true that her death has emboldened euthanasia activists who support legislating the right to die. Diane describes what led to her first arrest.
The first time I got arrested for Not Dead Yet was in the sit-in at the Hemlock Society's offices in January of 1998 when we took over the offices of the Hemlock Society USA, headquartered in Denver, Colorado. It was right after the head of Hemlock had issued a press release calling for a lesser class of homicide if you kill an old, ill, or disabled person, and she referenced Tracy Latimer in that context. And in addition, she had called for the creation of a judicial process for family members to request court-approved euthanasia of a burdensome relative. Not Dead Yet activists simply went into the offices of the Hemlock Society, and we filed in, about 25 of us, and packed their space with people mainly in wheelchairs, and refused to leave, and demanded that they retract their position. And we wanted to talk about it to the media, to publicize the fact that they had taken this position. I mean, they issued a press release calling for non-voluntary euthanasia, calling for incredible discrimination against people with disabilities, and yet the press had not bothered to print it. The press was still saying that Hemlock Society was a positive and progressive organization, and we felt that it was necessary to call attention to that, so that's what we did. And the police came and dragged us out eventually.
When I asked Diane Coleman to track her journey, to look at how she became not only part of the disability pride movement, but to head one of the loudest and most radical disability rights groups, she became suddenly quite vulnerable. And out of that vulnerability came hope, not pain.
I think that identity politics and disability is still a new concept. I know for myself, I grew up feeling that my disability was the bad part of me, and that what was acceptable about me was the part of me that could qualify, quote-unquote, as normal, quote-unquote. And I was really fundamentally ashamed of my body and anything else about me that flowed from being a disabled person. That it took me longer, that I was in people's way, that they had to help me, whatever. I felt ashamed. And then, when I was in my early 30s, I got to spend time with other people with disabilities with whom I had some things in common. We had had a good education. We'd been fortunate enough to have that. And it enabled me to get close to some people who'd really spent a lot of time thinking about their experience of oppression and sharing with each other. And it helped me to reinterpret my whole framework, to recognize that my family, for example, had accepted society's idea of who I was and what disability meant in a very negative way, and that while they were supportive toward me, they still basically felt that my disability was unacceptable. But when I was with other people with disabilities who had thought about their oppression and could talk about it, I found myself reassessing my entire personal history, and gradually, it's a lifelong battle, trying to turn back on all of the shame I had internalized, so that now I feel very much a part of the disability community, and try through our movement, through our culture, disability culture, disability art, and our political movement, to reach out to my brothers and sisters with disabilities. It's a long process, but I believe it's happening, and I see that disability politics is really becoming well known. And I have more and more had a sense of unity across cultures in the disability community. And I'm having a growing sense of hope that we, as people with disabilities, have the potential to lead all of society into a much better way of thinking about life and each other and our world and who we can be together than I ever have before.
The Reverend Jeffrey Wilder tells a story that's made its way through the disability community, traveling at the speed of email. In this story is the hope that Diane Coleman talks about, the hope that one day children born with disabilities will come to see themselves as already whole, already, if you will, holy.
There's a young girl of 14 or 15 who is deaf and attending this church. And for her to fully understand what's being said, she has an interpreter that interprets for her what is going on in the church setting. And one day after the service, a lady comes up to her and waits until the interpreter is available to sign for her and tells her how proud she is that the girl is a Christian and how happy she must be because when she dies and goes to heaven, she'll be able to hear like everyone else. And through the interpreter, the little girl says to her, well, if it's heaven, God will sign.
Tonight on Ideas, you've been listening to the concluding episode of Life, Death, and Disability. The program was prepared and presented by Dave Hingsburger. Special thanks to Michael Susi and Joe Jobs for their assistance. Studio operations were by Dave Field and Serge Rideau. Associate producer, Liz Naj. The program was produced in Montreal by Jane Lewis. Cassette and transcript copies of this program are available at a cost of $26 for the audio cassettes and $14 for the transcripts, taxes and shipping included. To order right now using a credit card, call area code 416-205-7367. Or you can send a check or credit card information to Ideas Transcripts, Box 500, Station A, Toronto, M5W1E6. Our email address is ideas@cbc.ca. The executive producer of Ideas is Richard Handler, and I'm Paul Kennedy. Please stay tuned now to CBC Radio 1 for the hourly news, followed by the Arts Today and Between the Covers.
I'm Nora Young, and you're listening to CBC Radio 1.
This is John LaCharity for Ottawa Morning. Coming up tomorrow after 5:30, meet the new U.S. Ambassador to Canada. Lots to talk about, including controversial policies on energy and the environment. How about the defensive missile plan? And free trade irritants such as softwood lumber. Meet the new U.S. Ambassador to Canada tomorrow on Ottawa Morning. You're listening to CBC Radio in Ottawa, 91.5.
Here is the CBC Hourly News. I'm Jim Martin. Ottawa has issued a condemnation of Afghanistan's ruling Taliban for attempting to force non-Muslims in that country to wear color-coded labels. Afghanistan is 95% controlled by the hardline adherents of Sharia law. Non-Muslims are a small minority within the country. Derek Stoffel reports.
The Taliban is proposing that all Hindus in Afghanistan wear yellow cloth badges to identify them as non-Muslim. Religious police in the country routinely arrest Muslims who violate the strict dress code of Sharia law. The Taliban news agency says the badges would ensure that the police would not go after Hindus. Around the world, the Taliban's move has caused outrage. Rajnikanta Verma is India's High Commissioner to Canada.
It's clearly a move aimed at the minorities. It's an assault on human dignity, human rights, violation of all norms of civilized behavior, and something which deserves to be condemned.
Hindu groups in Canada are condemning the Taliban's actions. Vyaluval Vubasava is the secretary of the Hindu Temple of Canada in Toronto.
We are very unhappy on their actions, and this is really, tantamount to persecution.
Ottawa called the Taliban policy abhorrent, and Canada's High Commission in Pakistan is in touch with diplomats from that country to try to pressure the Taliban to reverse the order, an order that Canada calls a violation of human rights. Derek Stoffel, CBC News, Toronto.
Police have charged serial killer Michael McGray with the sixth murder. McGray was first arrested in Moncton last year. Since then, he's claimed to have killed up to 16 people. He's now serving life sentences for murders in Moncton, St. John, and Montreal. And his claims have prompted police forces across the country to reopen old cases. Today, RCMP in Nova Scotia charged McGray in the 1985 killing of Elizabeth Tucker, a teenager from Dartmouth. Mark Genuist reports.
35-year-old Michael McGray was arrested in Moncton last year after slitting a woman's throat. That's when his history as a serial killer came out. In media interviews from prison, he told reporters he'd killed 16 people, including a Dartmouth teenager back in 1985.
Drove up outside of a bus station. Actually, she was hitchhiking, and there was another guy with me.
McGray has offered to plead guilty to this and other murders if the police would meet certain conditions. He wants better treatment in jail, and he wants immunity for anyone who was with him during those murders. RCMP Sergeant Wayne Noonan says the police aren't making any deals with McGray. Noonan says despite the confession, the police needed more evidence in the Dartmouth murder before they could charge McGray, and now they have it.
This file was never closed, but this person, McGray, came to our attention several years ago. And it's just through very exhaustive investigation that we were able to find the corroborating evidence that he's admitting to.
Noonan says he can't say if anyone else will be charged in the Dartmouth murder, and he says the police won't talk about any other investigations involving McGray. Mark Genuist, CBC News, Moncton.
Health Minister Alan Rock says he welcomes a debate on the legalization of marijuana. Support for legalization or decriminalization of marijuana has been growing in Canada. Yesterday, Tory leader Joe Clark told reporters he favors decriminalization. The House of Commons has created a committee that will look into the issue, but Rock won't say what results people should expect.
We have to look always to make sure our approach is the right one from the point of view of health, from the point of view of law enforcement, from the point of view of prevention. And so I welcome that debate, and no doubt whether we decriminalize or legalize marijuana will be part of that discussion.
Rock says the issue isn't a new one. He says the first government-commissioned report on marijuana was completed 30 years ago. And the number of nurses in Canada is growing. A report says after years of declines, the number of nurses working in Canada rose slightly last year. There were more than 232,000 registered nurses last year, a 1.7% increase. There are still concerns about an aging nursing workforce and a decline in the number of younger registered nurses. And that's the CBC Hourly News.
Here's the weather forecast now for Toronto, Niagara, Hamilton, Halton Peel, and York Durham. A few clouds tonight, a low of 10. Thursday, clouding over in the morning, scattered showers developing, a high of 19. And Friday, cloudy with showers and a high of 18. Windsor, cloudy with showers tapering off overnight, isolated thunderstorms with a low of 11. Thursday, showers and isolated afternoon thunderstorms with a high of 17. London, cloudy with scattered showers and isolated evening thunderstorms, a low of 11. Thursday, showers, isolated afternoon thunderstorms with a high of 18. Elgin and Brantford, clouding over with scattered showers developing, a low of 11. Thursday, cloudy with showers, risk of an afternoon thunderstorm with a high of 18. Waterloo, Barrie, Huronia, variable cloud, chance of a shower, a low of 8. Thursday, cloudy with showers developing, risk of a thunderstorm with a high of 18. Huron, Perth, Grey Bruce, cloudy with scattered showers, risk of a thunderstorm with a low of 8. Thursday, showers, risk of a thunderstorm with a high of 18. Parris Muskoka, variable cloud tonight with isolated showers, clearing around midnight with a low of 8. Thursday, clouding over in the morning, scattered showers developing, risk of an afternoon thunderstorm with a high of 19. Ottawa and Kingston, cloudy with showers and a low of 12. Tomorrow, cloudy with scattered showers with a high expected near 18. Peterborough and the Kawarthas, variable cloud tonight, a low of 8. Thursday, a mix of sun and cloud with scattered showers with a high expected near 18 degrees.
I'm Eleanor Wachtel, and this is the Arts Today. This evening, Labyrinth of Desire. Toronto writer Rosemary Sullivan examines the pleasures and perils of romantic obsession. In an essay called The Trail That Led to Me, Toronto poet and writer Rosemary Sullivan says, "For years I thought I knew what home was.